And it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Lily Feldman, who's a tremendous team member with the High Innovation Group. And I'll pass it over to her.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me over the podium. I'm on my tiptoes here. It's a little bit tall and I'm a little bit short. I apologize for making a sneak appearance in the agenda. I know we weren't formally listed, but I got approval from the big bosses, looking at Kim, to show a sneak preview of a new story that we've put together through the High Impact Initiative. Really excited to share this story. It's very focal for what we've been talking about today and what we're going to talk about in the next panel. And I think I'm going to let it speak for itself before I say too much more. But this is an initiative that was put together through the High Impact team, and it features Tracy Lyons, Dr. Virginia Borges, who's on our panel today, as well as patient advocate Linda Weatherby.
When you look at the young mothers in that 5 to 10 years after their most recent childbirth, they will have the highest risk for getting metastatic disease or death.
We discovered this molecule called semaphorin 7A that appears to allow breast cancer cells to survive all sorts of stress. We obtained our first batch of the antibody that we hope to become our therapy in the second week of December in 2020. In all of my years of doing treatment with mice, you expect the tumor growth to slow. What I didn't expect was for the tumors to disappear. CU Innovations has had a tremendous role in helping us to move this forward.
This drug is going to be potentially effective for all ages, all subtypes of people facing breast cancer. So come hell or high water, we are going to change what happens to my women in clinic in a really meaningful way.
I think most of us that came to CU Anschutz today, or in general, came here for some sense of impact and patient impact. And the theme of our event today, Pathways to Impact, I think really speaks to the fact that we can achieve that in a lot of different ways. And that impact to patients and people's lives can look a lot of different ways. I came here in 2020 in the midst of a pandemic. I spent 5 years training in pharmacology, getting my PhD in cancer research. I also spent many years working as a fellow in the innovations office. And the main thing that I learned, I think, is that most of that advancement doesn't happen in a silo. It's always going to be built on partnerships. And bringing people together, I think, as pretty much every session today has commented on, bringing people together with different perspectives is a really powerful way to be able to accelerate our work and really move towards being able to influence what's happening with patients, families, individuals, and society at large. I'm really excited to be able to introduce this panel and have brought these people together. The people on stage here are leaders in the space of not just women's healthcare, but research, clinical care, changing the face of investment landscape. It's really been an honor to work with all of you and also really, really fun. Thank you all so much for the engagement and planning and discussion. I know personally I could plan an entire day's worth of events around this one theme, but for the moment, I would love to be able to highlight our moderator, Elizabeth Reynolds, and then be able to turn the panel over to her for a few more introductions and our discussion questions. Elizabeth is someone that I met fairly recently through a consortium looking at investments and investing in women's health research specifically. She has an MBA. She's a founder and CEO of DubHub, which is a new women's health innovation hub here, accelerating women's health innovation and investment. She's a leader across digital health, medical devices, and venture-backed startups. She's worked in many different spaces, interacted with many different types of networks, and it's been really, really, really fascinating to hear her perspective coming from outside of campus, but really appreciating and being able to give a new light to everything that we're doing here. And so I'm extremely excited to present this panel to you. I think these are leaders who have very different perspectives and will be able to shed a lot of insight onto the major challenges and opportunities and excitements that we face today. So please help me welcome our panelists.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm glad you all stayed. I know it's getting late in the afternoon and there's going to be a lot of traffic, so I appreciate you all staying. Thank you, Lily, for that kind introduction, and thank you for sharing that video with us. It's a great way to start by highlighting the purpose behind this upcoming conversation, the energy building behind women's health innovation. As Lily mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Reynolds, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this conversation, highlighting the incredible innovation happening today in women's health and the investment behind this massive market opportunity. That said, it's a privilege to be here with this incredible panel, and I'd love to begin by inviting each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and share your name, your role, and your impact, and a little bit about the work you're doing today in women's health.
Hi, I'm Judy Regensteiner. I'm the director of the Ludeman Family Center for Women's Health Research and also a co-founder of that center. I'm also a distinguished professor of medicine and really passionate about women's health and sex differences research and excited to be here today. Go women's health.
Thank you, Judy. Anna?
Hello, I'm Anna Jeter. I am co-founder and chief regulatory officer of AOA Dx, and we are an early stage venture funded startup here in Denver developing a blood test for early detection of ovarian cancer.
Thank you, Anna. And probably needs no introduction, but go ahead, Kim.
Kimberly Muller, Vice Chancellor of Innovation here at Anschutz. My passion is really working with these amazing faculty innovators to figure out how to bring discoveries out of the lab to our patients and a specific impact for women's health.
Thank you, Kim. And Ginger.
And as you saw, I'm Virginia Borges. I go by Ginger, lifelong nickname. I came to this institution 23 years ago to build a breast cancer program because oddly enough, we didn't have one back then. Along the way, I found my passion in young women's breast cancer. And so with the support of my colleagues, really developed one of the first of its kind, both clinical and research-based programs focusing on why young women do worse when they get diagnosed with breast cancer. I'm a translational researcher with a lab and have some academic roles as well, and I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you all so much. Okay, let's start with some questions, and I'd like to start with Judy if possible. Looking at today's women's health landscape, what are some of the hottest topics that you're seeing personally, and what are the greatest areas of excitement for you as well?
I think women's health is one of the most exciting areas for research, and I'm a researcher as well, a clinical translational researcher, but so much hasn't been done. As everybody who works in the field knows, the opportunity is endless. This can also be frustrating because you're thinking, when will I get answers? But it's really exciting. And so we are excited about all the opportunities that present themselves. In the 1940s, and this will not be a long history lesson, I promise you, in the 1940s, modern clinical trials started. Very few women were involved in those trials at that time. In 1977, though, all women were excluded from research because of the effects of the sedative thalidomide that caused birth defects. However, it was used somehow to exclude women who were not of childbearing age, who weren't sexually active, and who were willing to use birth control. So women were almost completely excluded until 1993 with the NIH Reauthorization Act, which included women and minorities again. So it's been a long time coming, and the gap is enormous. So the opportunities, again, are phenomenal. Three of the big areas that I see are with GLP-1s, the drugs that cause weight loss. They do increase lifespan for sure, but we don't really know the long-term effects of GLP-1s on the heart, on muscle, and on bone. And studies in this area are going to be really exciting and help predict long-term care. Congestive heart failure is a disease, well, it's more than one disease, for which there are some treatments, but in women, there's a particular type of heart failure called HFpEF, where there's no treatments, and it mostly affects women, older women, and there are no effective treatments to prolong life or even quality of life. So this is a wide open area for discovery, and it's, again, truly exciting and truly frustrating. And also, finally, the Women's Health Initiative was going to look at the effects of hormone replacement therapy. However, it got shut down in 1991 because of concerns about breast cancer and other terrible things, some heart disease. But in response, the wrong women were included in that study probably, and will never get the answers because those studies were shut down. They've never been completed. Women today want to know, what about hormone replacement therapy? Is it safe? A lot of people think so. Is it not safe? There's just a lot to do and some really, really interesting questions.
Thank you, Judy. Anna, same question. Hot topics. Obviously, you're focused on early detection for ovarian cancer, but what are the hot topics that you're seeing and really excited about, generally speaking, around women's health?
Yeah, I think in terms of hot topics, there's many different ways you can look at it. In terms of indications, I know menopause is the hottest topic right now. I often make the joke as if it appeared 5 years ago. But I am very glad that today women are speaking out about it. It's a huge market, right? I don't know that many areas where you have 100% incidence rate, and in menopause you do. So imagine how big that market is, right? And I think today investors are starting to understand that, and they're starting to look into it. But we have also very high incidence diseases like endometriosis, like PCOS, that have the same incidence as diabetes, but the number of shots on goal we have there are significantly less. So we need to increase a lot of our funding and looking in that area. And I think looking from outside in a different perspective is what's happening right now with like WHOOP and Aura, where they are combining multimodal ways to look at women, as well as multi-omic biomarkers, right? So they're looking at blood-based biomarkers. They're looking at women through their lifetime and what is happening to them. And I think a lot of research and a lot of interesting research is going to come out of it, and a lot of opportunity as well.
Thank you. Really exciting stuff. And Kim, talk a little bit about what's going on here. What are the hot topics surrounding women's health at Anschutz?
You know, I'll answer that with my investor hat on. I think, you know, when I started investing, if I had a women's health opportunity, I almost could never find investment for that. That has fundamentally changed right now. I think we're in this moment of time where the trends have flipped, and now women's health is something that people want to invest in. They're putting money into. We're starting to see it at the research side, translational, and getting things to patients. And so for me, living through this journey for the past, 15 years as a woman investor, where there's very few women investors, it's single digits that make decisions. This is a great, great time to be having this discussion and to be an advocate for women's health.
Thank you so much, Kim. I love that perspective around the investment side, and hopefully we can come back to that, because I think it's important as we talk about who has capital and who's investing in that, using that capital to invest in specific areas, especially around women's health. So thank you for that. Ginger.
So breast cancer has always been something that has had quite good visibility in this country. It has its own month, right? October. For me, what is exciting in that, lost in that shuffle of breast cancer in the US, the younger women who have gotten diagnosed have really been overlooked. It is incredibly different to get diagnosed with breast cancer when you are 23 or 33 or 43 than when you are 63 or 73. And also, at the start of my career, the number of grant reviews that I got back that said this didn't matter. It was so rare. Unfortunately, it is now the fastest increasing section of breast cancer. And at the rate we're going in the United States, if the pace stays the same, there will be over 50,000 women under age 45 diagnosed. So if that were a standalone cancer for women, it would be fourth of the most frequent cancer across, of course, breast cancer being the number one. And, you see up there the title Pearl Scientific under my name. One of the, I think, other reflections that I have on the field is the start of my career. We had a drug called tamoxifen invented in the 70s. And then in the 90s, we had 3 other drugs invented. And then, you went another decade, really, before you had the next big breakthrough in how we treat hormone receptor positive breast cancer. And then since like the 2020s, it's boom, 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 boom. And in 2026, we will probably get at least four new drugs approved if the FDA starts meeting. So the pace of being able to bring a discovery to the clinic is massively faster than it used to be. And Pearl Scientific is the company that Tracy Lyons and I have co-founded based on the video you just saw. And I think, that too has gone at a much faster pace than what I saw was the beginning of the field back 30 years ago.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really important. Second question for our panelists. I'd love everyone to answer this question as well if you can. Can you describe a pivotal moment when data, market feedback, or investor expectations forced a meaningful shift in your work? And what does that decision look like kind of behind the scenes?
For me, my pivotal moment was when I turned down a job at the University of Minnesota, which was a better job than the one I had at the time, to be honest. But I turned it down, and then I said, if I'm going to stay here so that I don't feel stupid, what am I going to do different about my career? And I decided at that moment that I wanted to start a Center for Women's Health Research, and worked with other people to do that. And it's interesting because I never thought it could fail. And I'm really lucky that that was true. It didn't fail. But that moment really changed my life. So, it changed it a lot in many, many ways. So it was an exciting moment, and I'll never forget it.
Thank you, Judy. It's interesting what Judy just said, and it kind of takes me back to the panel we had just beforehand, and one of the gals in the audience asked such a beautiful question about taking things personally. And Judy shared, I think on a call we all had last week, that same thing. She never envisioned it failing. And I think it's such a great mindset and a great space as a innovator, as an entrepreneur, or as an investor, right? Just always believing in the team and the people. We're all people coming together to advance whatever innovation we're putting forward. And I just love Judy's passion behind. She never entertained it failing, and here we are. So thank you.
I'm not sure how smart that makes me sound.
Super smart, super smart. Anna, same question.
Yes. So I think on a prep call, we were talking about this, and Judy and I were talking about the audacity. In order to be, I think, a founder, in order to start something brand new, you kind of have to have that audacity and believe in yourself and believe in the people around you that you can make it. So the example I had for me was perhaps a bit smaller than Judy's, which was so life-changing, but something that happened at our company, and something I think that happens at many companies. So at our company, we licensed the technology out of University of McGill. We had a really specific vision about what it was going to look like. And it was specifically 2 biomarkers on ELISA plates. And we were certain that's what we were going to commercialize, and that's what was going to succeed. Well, we learned, as you often do when you take technology from an academic lab into a commercial space, is that the reagents weren't robust enough. They weren't robust enough to meet the commercial demands that are required. And at that point, we had a really pivotal moment to understand what's going to happen to us as a company, because our investors joined us, everybody's joined us on these particular biomarkers on this particular platform. Well, what we learned is actually, by having audacity and believing in ourselves, is that we had a much greater opportunity by pivoting to a different technology. Now we're doing mass spec, and we're doing a clinical mass spec. And that allowed us to pivot away from just 2 biomarkers into potentially thousands of biomarkers, and more importantly, multi-omics. And we started a completely different field, looking at 3 different biomarker types in women's blood, creating clinical mass spec, which is really at the cusp of getting really exciting adoption right now, where perhaps NGS was about 10, 15 years ago, and really taking the company in a new direction and seeing a much bigger vision. So what could have been such a limiting moment, oh no, we failed, the technology we got didn't quite work out as we expected, actually became a huge opportunity for us to think bigger and to envision even a different product that could perform even better. And so since then, we have taken the development to much greater heights than we could have ever imagined, than our team could have ever imagined, and are in a much stronger position today.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate that so much. It's sort of a metaphor for life in some ways, right? Just to being really nimble and listening, whether you're an early stage company starting out and dreaming of something, to be able to pivot and to be able to make changes as you go along, not to abandon your vision and your platform, but to be willing to make some changes based on market shifts and data. So I really appreciate that and resonate with that. Kim.
Yeah, I started my career in law in New York City. And then after that, I joined Jonathan Rothberg and I was building and selling companies in the life sciences space. And I would say one of the biggest career moments for me was when I pivoted to academia. Academia was never a place that I thought I would be. I was building, selling companies. I was going fast. I wasn't sure that was the right environment for me. And I got recruited to go into Yale. And I thought I'd go into Yale and start some companies and figure out how to get their best technologies and then go start a bunch of new companies with that. The very first faculty member that I worked with was a woman by the name of Joanne Wheatus. Dr. Wheatus was a radiation oncologist, and she came with an idea. She had identified some novel SNPs in microRNA, and she wanted to turn it into a company. And I remember sitting around the table with all the people in our office, and they all laughed at it, and they thought it was silly. And so I was the new person. I raised my hand kind of sheepishly, and I said, does anybody care if I take that one? And so they let me take it and they all laughed at me as I walked away. And Joanne went through so many trials and tribulations trying to build this company, so many obstacles. And it's now a $1 billion company, AOA Dx, that she started. And so it really just changed my whole career trajectory because I realized these amazing researchers, have this work. And if we make the wrong decision, these things never make it to patients. So that was my experience.
So oddly enough, it was a Tuesday afternoon around this exact time back in 1997 that I had this odd moment. I met two patients at the same time, one of whom had brain metastasis from her breast cancer. So she was not eligible for this clinical trial I had just been handed to run by my mentor back then. The other one had also metastatic breast cancer that by all textbook definitions should have taken her life within 6 months of my meeting her. But she did have this gene that had just recently been described that nobody had heard of before, and she was eligible for this clinical trial with a very breakthrough drug, didn't have a name, first of its kind type of technology. You might have heard of one of these things. They're called monoclonal antibodies. So the patient who was eligible came onto the clinical trial and she got randomized to get the standard chemo with the experimental drug. She's alive today. She's 3 years older than I am, and she lives on Cape Cod. And so you're a really weird oncologist when the very first patient you ever put on a clinical trial is cured of something that should not have been curable. If you know anything about breast cancer, obviously the gene is HER2 and the drug is called Herceptin, but that was a absolutely revolutionary moment in the field that occurred at the exact same time of another revolutionary moment, which was I was in training to be a bone marrow transplanter for breast cancer. And 1998 was the year that the pivotal trials came out that said, not a good idea, didn't work. So overnight, bastions of bone marrow transplant, including this institution, had their programs collapse. And I had to make a decision. Was I a transplanter or was I a breast cancer doctor? But because of that experience with seeing what a targeted therapy could do, I decided that was it. I was going to be a breast cancer doctor and I was going to spend my life figuring out targeted therapies. So I've worked for all the future to now with other drug companies with their hot new drug, trying to figure out what does the data look like? Is it worth bringing into our clinical trial platform? Do I want to advocate for it if it's running into trouble, et cetera? And then, along the way, as you saw in the video, Tracy found a gene that nobody has ever heard of. And now we have a drug that doesn't have a name yet. And the data that showed how well it was performing preclinically made me sit up and go, oh, I've seen something like that before. And so here we are, and I never thought at any point in my career I would be trying to do the entrepreneur thing, but thankfully I have a colleague who is very determined, and I'm here with her. And, so it's just been a great ride from kind of what was an example of an unexpected afternoon in clinic that highlighted something that I've focused on for the rest of my career that all of a sudden is landing the possibility of a discovery that would come out of our work together.
Thank you for those stories, those meaningful ways of pivoting. Everyone has them, and I appreciate you sharing those. Our next question, I'd love if Kim and Anna could take. Where do you see the biggest disconnect between academia, industry, and investors evaluate readiness or risk?
Sure.
And
Okay.
where do you also see alignment?
So where I see the biggest gaps between the three is that if I start with academia, I think academia really focuses on novelty and publication, and oftentimes they believe that they have a commercial ready product. I can tell you, as somebody who's worked with many academics, that's usually not the case, because what industry really cares about is reproducibility and scale, which oftentimes innovation does not, right? You get something new, you get something exciting, you publish a paper on it. Now, how do you make it scalable? How do you make it work for everybody? How do you get people to access it? How do you get insurance companies to pay for it, right? A lot of times academics may not be thinking through that lens. And as far as investors go, they're thinking about de-risking and time to revenue, right? That's key to them. And how do you show to them the milestones that show that you are de-risking at the same time producing the reproducibility and scalability that is required to ensure safety and the clinical trials. And so I think the three have to work together, because a lot of innovation does in fact come out of academia, and we have to be very comfortable partnering together and understanding that we can collaborate. We don't have to compete. We have an amazing collaboration with the University of Colorado that we would never have the access to the patients that they do. And having this fantastic collaboration has allowed us to do many, many publications, which really satisfies the academics in them. And it has allowed us to really produce novel results and show that scale that can actually reach women. What does it mean to have, a clinical mass spec in our case specifically?
Thank you. I love that. Kim?
Yeah, I would just build upon that just slightly. I agree with everything that was said. I think the biggest disconnect that we see is we all come from very different cultures. Academia is very different from industry, which are both different from investment. And when I think about the people who are successful, it's the people who can traverse those boundaries, who have the ability to communicate in the language of each of those different cultures and find the mentorship to translate. Those are the people that I look at and I say, those are the ones that have an interesting technology. They figure out how to talk about it to the appropriate audience, and then it gets translated. And, the only last point that I would make, and it's echoed by the last panel, which I thought was really amazing comments, is, you really have to surround yourself with different people that don't speak your language, people that are not people that are in your orbit. Those are the people that I see that are successful translating their research.
That's such a great segue, because I was thinking about that as well with the last panel, and we are all somewhat siloed and we all have our acronyms. And even on our last conversation we had, I think last week, different verbiage was used and some of us knew it and some of us didn't, right? So we're all just used to staying somewhat in our own lanes. But I love the opportunity, especially like something like this today, right? We've got such a diverse panel of experts up here, but then also a diverse body of people in the audience, right? From different walks of life. And events like this that give us the opportunity to partner together and to learn from each other and to really collaborate and to push innovation, right, to where it needs to be. So thank you all for that. Okay, Kim, this question's back to you. So you're back to back, sorry. How do investors think about the groundbreaking research happening here? And how do we communicate, how does the school, Anschutz, communicate our work to the off-campus community? So how do you, what we were sort of talking about, how do you take this language internally, right, from academia out into the global market to other folks?
Yeah, I'll give a quick answer, and then I'd love to hear from my colleagues who are actually kind of living this world. I would say that success breeds success. I think really having role models that have done that. When I saw the panel that went before them, every single person on that panel had built a tremendous company that had such huge impact. And I think that as we get more successful, I think Dr. Borges will talk about some of the work that she did in getting a real drug to market. It builds the credibility for this institution. And what used to be hard when we didn't have a lot of successes to showcase, now we have so many. That opens the door to investors from around the country. And so my job becomes much easier thanks to the work that the people on this panel are doing. But I don't know if you want to talk about it. You or Judy or the startup.
Does anyone else want to follow up on that? Add anything to that? What do investors think about groundbreaking research that's happening here? What is the sentiment?
I'm on the other side of things. I'm mentoring young scientists who will become, people who make those discoveries, both MDs and PhDs. And I am sort of starting to dip my toes into this arena, but with some of my younger scientists that are working on projects in bioinformatics and in biomedical engineering and other areas. So I don't know what investors think, but I would think they would think very highly of the kind of work that's happening. Again, it's a pioneering field. It's a field that didn't really get going till 1993. So lots to do, and it's exciting.
Ginger, anything to add?
Yeah, I think in the earlier panel, we heard folks who expressed the idea that they had something and they thought, great, this is it, we're done. And having heard the words, well, you're early yet, quite a few times, but keep going, is encouraging because nobody is looking at us going, huh? Right? They're encouraging, keep going, but obviously if they wanted to help with that, that would be wonderful. So we just keep going. But I think the example you were mentioning earlier from our call is once upon a time, I was fortunate enough to learn about a drug being made by a small biotech right up the road and was able to be in the clinical trial that was putting it first in human beings. And this was clearly a very active drug. And one of the things that really caught my attention about this molecule was not only did it target HER2, an area of breast cancer I've subsequently specialized in, but it got up into the brain. And that matters because once we developed effective therapies against HER2-positive breast cancer and patients started surviving longer, brain mets emerged as the cancer's answer to our new therapies. And there wasn't really anything that got up there and targeted. So here we had a drug that could do that and looked very effective in clinic, a pill, and with very little side effects in comparison to the usual things. And so I was looking at the data from that phase 1 going, yeah, let's go. What's coming next? And the company shelved the drug. They were small and they had a different compound that was their choice. And so, that just wasn't okay. And so eventually there was a new company that was willing to purchase or license it and move it forward. And at that point in time, I found this side of myself. We heard people mention in the earlier panel, there are a lot of introverts. I'm probably one too, but this was a moment in time where I wasn't because I just absolutely stalked the medical director. This drug crossed the blood-brain barrier. They had to allow people with brain mets onto the clinical trial, and that was usually an exclusion criteria in all of our studies. And I wasn't alone in voicing this, but definitely a loud voice, and it worked. They did it. It showed tremendous efficacy of brain mets. People could live over a year without a new metastasis showing up in their brain, which was unheard of. And now it's a norm that brain metastases are allowed. And we've had a subsequent development of a number of very brain effective drugs, such that we can do things like spare surgery and radiation, which matters because these are young brains that still have to go to work and still have to take care of their families. So, it's an example of how even something that to the academician or the clinician, you're looking at it going, yeah. And then you're like, well, okay, well, that you can't just let that. You can't drop that. You can't let it be.
That's a great story. Thank you for your tenacity and work on that. That's amazing. Judy, our next question. What role did large institutions and senior leadership need to play in accelerating women's health specifically through innovation? And what does meaningful commitment look like in practice?
Well, I'm really fortunate to work at this institution. I will say that, which is an institution very unlike some others, but this institution allowed me to pursue a dream and didn't stop me and let me go. Now, institutions can block that kind of thing as well, but my institution did not. It was really positive, and the going was not easy, but it was possible. And I have felt supported in my pursuit of women's health research and sex differences research my whole career. An institution can provide so much in terms of source of support. That includes money. So we'll say the M word, money is critical. And this institution has provided money to the work we've done. And we've shown that our center, the Ludeman Center, is viable also. So it's been a two-way street the whole way, where we showed that we could do what we said we'd do. And we've done everything we said we will do. And the institution in turn has done what it said it would do. to the point that now the institution is becoming interested in really, we're a research institution, but now this institution is telling me they're interested in growth of more clinical services for women. And that's so exciting because that's the goal. All the work we're doing, it's how we can help women have better, healthier lives. Everyone says, this is a common answer people say to me when I say, why women's health? We have to study it. They say, well, women live longer. I've heard that a lot. Yeah, they do, but they don't live in better quality of life. Women have often worse quality of life. They live longer, but not able to do the things they want to do. We want to see women live long and men live longer and everybody have the best possible quality of life so that women live and thrive and men as well. So lots of goals. And the institution has made me feel proud to work here. And I know people at some very, famous institutions who have not seen that, who've had to struggle the whole way and not gotten support. So I am grateful to this institution. And an institution like this can really change the future.
Thank you for that. One comment I would just make is what I'm seeing, and Anna, maybe you would comment on this briefly as well, is that we are very lucky here in Colorado that women's health is a priority, and we are studying it, we are innovating around it, and we are making progress on investing in it as well. And so just a side note, it's one of my passions. I want to see Colorado as a leader in women's health, and I think we are well on our way thanks to the people up here on this stage, and then obviously in the audience and the university supporting it. Kim or Ginger, anything else to add to Judy's feedback?
Just a very short thing. What really struck me as Judy was talking is I kind of look in this room and Judy tells the story that I love about how the center started with a small group of people having coffee and now what it is. And I kind of look out at this table and the people who have made these amazing contributions. And I think about it from the UC Health perspective, from the leadership perspective. It's now one of the top priorities of this institution. And it's converging at a time where we want to fund it from a research perspective, an investment perspective. But imagine if these people didn't come together, we wouldn't be on this stage right now. And so that convergence and that time right now, like this is our time. And it's thankful to these people who had the persistence, the vision, worked tirelessly, all playing a role in making that happen.
One more thing, quickly to say is that community has played a huge role in our story. From the beginning, a lot of people had a lot of input. One of my ideas is that we should involve the community because no institution has all the resources that can make this kind of thing happen. And our community got really involved. We have an advisory board from the community. We have many wonderful donors to the center, but getting the community involved was the right thing to do and teaching them what we learned in lay terms, right thing to do. And it made a huge difference for us.
Yeah, I would add to what Judy said in that I trained previously at a very big institution on the East Coast where if you weren't the chosen one, you didn't get the resources. There was a certain size trough, and if you weren't the prize piglet, you didn't get those resources. And here, a pie in the sky idea of starting at the same time a clinical and research program in a subset of breast cancer that people were still doubting even mattered. Maybe my colleagues didn't think it would be successful, but they weren't going to tell me that. They were just going to tell me, you go, girl. And the institution and no one, my leadership over time never once said to me, no, you can't do that. They said, sure. And now we're an internationally recognized program. And as young women's breast cancer has become higher in the awareness of the oncology world as a problem, there are other institutions that are scrambling to catch up with what we have had dialed in for, 15 years. And so I think it just shows that this place will allow the vision that you may have, the creativity you're willing to bring to your job. If you have the gumption to go for it, they're not going to do anything other than say, yeah, show us what you can do, which is incredibly unique. I've never been told how many days I need to go to clinic or, you're not doing this, you have to do that. And that freedom is what makes the difference between not being able to pursue these dreams or being successful.
Thank you for that. Okay, our final question to everyone. What is one skill or mindset that early career innovators should develop to position themselves for long-term success in women's health? And what advice would you give your younger self, if you could? Who wants to take that first?
I would say I wish I had learned younger in life to be fearless. Doesn't mean I'm not afraid. Failure never feels good. And for me, failure means somebody over there still dies. But fearless means it doesn't matter if I am not individually successful, right? I have seen so many people in my field and even at this institution, particularly women, decide they can't succeed long before anybody has ever suggested to them that they are not succeeding. But it's the thinking 5 years down the line and, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. And I think that mindset needs to just be evaporated. I've been told my entire career, oh, the funding's going to dry up. Well, hasn't yet. We'll see what this year brings, and just that sense of, sit down and think to yourself, what is the worst thing that happens if you fail? The worst thing that happens to me if I fail is I either go into private practice or industry and make 3 times my current salary. So really, what's the actual risk? But what's the prize if I succeed? Right? When I lay down in my grave, I'm not going to care about whether it was 215 or 315 papers, or how many times I got invited to give a talk, or how many grants I got. What I'm going to care about is, who did I train, and are they successful? And have they trained the next success of the generation? And did I do anything that improved the lives of the people who trusted me to take care of them? Legacy.
Boy, that's inspiring. Thank you. Thank you. Kim?
I don't really know how to follow that, to be honest with you. It was so beautiful. I'll keep my remarks short. I think there's been just a trend today. It's all about, if you have a dream, go for it, be persistent. No's are going to happen. You got to keep going. And, it's amazing what happens when you believe in yourself and you keep going. And I think in academia, we're all kind of taught to be risk adverse, and that goes against what you need to be successful, to build the things that these amazing people on this panel have built. And so I would say, if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, don't overanalyze it, just go. Stuff happens when you just move. And so I think that would be my takeaway.
Absolutely. And I think to add to those two, the fearlessness and just going for it, and the audacity that you have to have, also learning the skills of communication, right? I think specifically with scientists and early career scientists, and in my company, we probably have 20 plus PhDs, and they often think that the data speaks for itself, and it actually often does not. You have to learn, how are you able to actually communicate this data, this information, to the audience that's in front of you. And the investor audience could be completely different than a grant audience, then it would be different than if you're trying to make another connection somewhere else. And really understanding, how do you tell a compelling story to bring these individuals with you on the journey? And so what I would say to my younger self is, get on more panels sooner, right? Take a speaking class, just start speaking, speak to different individuals, and really understand what works and what doesn't, and take that feedback and lean into sales, learn sales, right? Because I think a lot of times that's considered like a dirty word, especially if you're in academia. But what it teaches you is to understand the individual's need and how to tell a compelling story to that particular person to get to where you want to go. And I think that's a skill that has served me and my colleagues extremely well.
I think being a lifelong learner, really, because I keep learning new things, and it's not that I'm that young anymore. So if you hadn't noticed, but I am learning new things all the time, and I'm driven by my passion, because life, your work career is a long time, so you should be doing something you really love. And, for me, it's women's health, sex differences, and changing the lives of women. My grandmother led my father's family out of Nazi Germany in 1937. And this was a wonderful woman with a whole lot of courage, who was willing to do that, change her whole life, give up everything they had. And she did it because she knew bad times were coming. And my grandfather was beaten up because he was a prominent lawyer in Germany a few times. So they got out. And I revered this woman. She was one of those people, and we all know who I'm talking about. There's people that make you feel bad sometimes about yourself every time you talk to them. So naturally, you seek out frequent conversations with them. But there's also those people that make you feel good about yourself and build you up and just naturally are that kind of person. My grandmother made me feel so worth it, so worthwhile, and so loved. So she, at 94, which was older, got type 2 diabetes, even though she was a very active person and not overweight. And she literally started developing dementia then through mini strokes. And I lost her. I still remember the day, the last time I went to see her, she was in a care facility and she didn't know my name anymore. And my heart broke on that day. And I said, this shouldn't be happening to people. And I'm going to do my best to make sure it doesn't happen to people. And that has driven me my whole career. So my passion is there. I'm a scientist. I get to do work with scientists. It's really exciting. And I just love what I do. It's fun as well as important. And I'm very lucky that I get to do what's fun as well as for my work. So that's my thought.
Thank you all so much. That is our last question, but I'd love to open it up to questions in the audience for this panel. Does anyone want to ask a question?
Well, thank you all. That was inspiring to hear you all speak up there. What are the barriers that still remain for treating women's health? And then also on a positive note, what do you think are the ways to overcome those barriers?
Women's health, just a note that women are 51% of the population, so not a really small group, but it has been not prioritized over the years. As you heard, serious women's health research began really in 1993, not 1893, so very recently. And that's been for a variety of reasons, none of which are very good. But now the awareness that women and men are not identical. Women are not little men. They're completely different. You know, you look around, you can see the differences between men and women. Why would you think that internally they're identical? And they're not. So if you look for sex differences, they're there, and from the brain to the toes. So it's weird. It's like awareness of this just came upon us fairly recently. So the barriers are sort of biased that men and women would be different. For instance, there are no sex-specific clinical guidelines now, like for blood pressure, very common cardiovascular risk factor. You'll get treated identically if you're a man or a woman of the same age. We need to get the evidence. And there is a societal bias probably that, well, we've studied men, and men were the only patients in the early blood pressure trials, and that's where all the guidelines come from. So people have to stop accepting that and start questioning, how can we get the data and evidence to people so that we understand that men and women are different, you know, and we have to understand. I wrote an article for JAMA Open Network called Seek and Ye Shall Find, the importance of sex differences. And you find them wherever you look. And if there aren't sex differences, it's good to know that too. But evidence is what gets us there as scientists, not, you know, assuming things. So good question.
And I would just add that even though it is 2026, there are still topics that are rather taboo. And we teach young people about puberty. And then we somehow feel like there is no importance in the role of ongoing education about the years of health that come forward. And most women grow up maybe getting information from their OBGYN. Maybe they have a mother or a sister. Worst case scenario these days, it's the internet. And I think that's changing in that things like menopause health actually is openly discussed, whereas, you know, if you had brought that up to my mother, she would have been like, shh, as if someone was listening. But as a person who takes away women's estrogen for a living, I can tell you that the lack of understanding of what that does to the human body, from skin to hair to the sexual organs, and even just, having conversations around what is normal sexual functioning and what do you need to do to maintain it, is something that very few oncologists are comfortable doing. You have to, be trained to stand up in front of a room of 400 people and start discussing vaginas, right? I said the word, but everybody should be able to say that word, right? I won't ask you all to join me in saying that word, but honestly, would you if I did? Yeah. And, but this is just not a part of our comfortable conversations. And yet 51% of the population has one and needs to know what to do about it. And the other 49% of the population would be happier if we knew what to do about it too. So this is what I would like to see change. And I think it's the younger generation that will really help force that. Thank you.
Can I would love to just not leave her question really quickly, because I want to bring Anna into this as well. One of the other barriers, and I've been in healthcare most of my life as well in a lot of different capacities, mostly on the business side. So on the investor side, the innovation side. But one of the huge things that I do see currently as a barrier for women's health is actually investors understanding the market. And you can't invest in something if you don't understand the market. And it kind of speaks to what they were all talking about as well. And I hope, I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm going to. I'd love Anna to talk about a really exciting study that her and her team recently shared at JP Morgan in January this year, 2026. And it's a wonderful study. And I think it's important for people to take a look at it. You can jump on their website, you can download it. It's called Follow the Exits, and it's an really important piece of research that they did. And I'd love you to just chime in and talk about it, because it really helps identify the market. And like I said, investors have to understand there is a market to invest in. And I think it'd be great if you could just chime in here. That'd be great.
Yes, absolutely. So this came out of, as I mentioned before, we're an early stage company that's doing early detection of ovarian cancer. So why did we do a big research project and put out a report that's so completely different from what we do? And my co-founder and I, we're having dinner one night, and as part of what we have to do is we fundraise. We fundraise all the time for the wonderful things that our team is doing. And what we were hearing from investors is, especially right now, we're raising our Series A, when you're getting into the bigger check sizes, is that, well, LPs think this is a niche market. We're really waiting for that first exit. We really want to show our general managers, our LPs, that this is a viable, durable market. Women's health seems pretty hot right now, but it hasn't been proven. It hasn't been proven as a category that has return on investment. And we're sitting at dinner, and I've worked in women's health for the last 15 years, and we're like, but there is this exit and this exit and this exit. And together we were able to name $6 billion exits just at one dinner. And then I did a small survey of colleagues in this space, and I said, do you know of any billion-dollar exits in women's health? And they said no. Every single person came back no. One person said, there must be one. Like, I'll give you one. I don't know what it is, but there must have been one over time. So when we did this study, we looked at all exits, which is either M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, or an IPO, initial public offering of a company that exits and therefore returns money to their investors. We looked at from the year 2000 to the end of 2024 and a little bit of 2025, and we found about 275 companies that had an exit in women's health, and we classified women's health as exclusively, disproportionately, indifferently. And we found that there's over $100 billion in exits. So when people say, just wait, we're waiting for the first one, we're waiting for the first one, there's been like 275 and 27 unicorns. But when you ask somebody about unicorns, the first place they think about is tech. Nobody's really thinking about health, and certainly nobody's thinking about women's health. And that's the perspective that needs to be changed. And this is a report that we presented at JP Morgan and that we're still talking about quite a bit. But not only has there been a very significant return on investment, but as an asset class, women's health returns above other asset classes that are investable in health and in other areas across the board. And so as these companies, there's only a certain pot of money, and we're all fighting for this money. And today it's probably AI, right? Tomorrow it's going to be something else. But investors have to make a decision. If I put $1 somewhere, where am I going to get the biggest return? Today, they don't realize that it's women's health, but that's the reality. And that's what this report has showed, and the continued work that we're going to do is going to show as well.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Next question.
Hi, I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate studying triple-negative breast cancer. A question that I have is just coming from overall today, we've been talking a lot about AI, implementing AI, things like that. The question that I have in general is about implementing processes in a clinical standpoint. So, for example, during pregnancy and labor, we know that standing upright, for example, gives us better odds in terms of maternal mortality, infant mortality, et cetera, except that a 2023 publication came out. 90% of labor and delivery is still done on the back. And so the question that I have is, even with data that we have to support the outcomes for women's health research, no matter what the endpoint is, I often feel like the research is falling on deaf ears, and a lot of these processes are not implemented. And so I'm wondering, one, is there any financial benefit to, say, a CU Innovations or to a CU or any kind of university when we're implementing processes clinically? And then two, especially like as we talk about implementing AI, things like that, like what is the benefit to a university or to a clinical standpoint of implementing new processes, especially as we talk about sex differences that Judy talked about earlier for heart outcomes, or if we're talking about implementing clinical mass spec, things like that.
I mean, I think you asked the $1 million question, quite honestly. This is what we think about all the time, is how do you take this research and make it actionable at the point of care? That's what people don't do. This table, Judy, we've all been talking about this. AI right now, a lot of it's in its research phases. It's not being used at the point of care. We heard a lot of that today. How do we take good evidence and research and make sure that it is actionable when Dr. Borges is at the point of care treating her physicians? That is the gap. And I would say one thing about this university and the hospital system here, the hospital systems, both Children's and UC Health, maybe more UC Health in this instance, that is their differentiator, is trying to figure out how do we get that information to the point of care. So much work to be done. But if you asked what was one of our highest priorities, that would be it. Because if we can't get that research to the point of care where it matters most, it doesn't impact our patients. And I don't believe we've done our job. But I don't know if you want to answer it from the clinical perspective.
Well, so there's many different forms of research, one of which is implementation science. So here's the data. The data supports this would be the right thing to do. How do you actually get that into the clinics? And so all institutions have to prove various statistics, mortality being a big one across an entirety of a hospital system, and, maternal mortality in the postpartum setting, a big one. And so, there's ways to devise a clinical program that pretty much costs next to nothing to implement, right? I mean, positioning during labor. But if you could get the buy-in from OBGYN or whomever you're working with to say, look, can we do a small study, or can we show that this is a quality improvement, and implementation science type of outcomes, which is not my forte, so I'm tripping over some of the acronyms, that doesn't take an investor. That's something you can just do. Many of the things I did in starting the Young Women's Breast Cancer Program had zero funding, but it was just understanding this is what my patients needed. So you kind of get the coalition of the willing who can provide the clinical services and help make something happen. They get reimbursed for their time, but that didn't require a grant or a big publication or any investors. So there's two different things. Investors are when you have a product or a device or something that is unique enough that it's patentable. A programmatic initiation or an initiative can just happen.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a question around what we could be doing legislatively relative to women's health in this environment. As we look at scanning for early breast cancer in these younger women and dense breast tissue, um, screening mammograms are covered, but diagnostic and those types of things aren't. You have HerScan now showing up in the state of Colorado doing advanced testing, but it's not paid for by insurance. What are some of the things we can think about and do in an innovative way to improve healthcare in the state relative to measures like that?
There are advocacy groups for women's health, or the Society for Women's Health Research, which is national, advocates for women's health nationally in many issues. And they're very effective advocacy groups. So you can contact them, perhaps, volunteer for them. You can write to your Congress people, you can write to your senators and your House representative and make a case for what you want. You got to use your voice because otherwise nobody will know what you want. So I do recommend the Society for Women's Health Research. They're reputable and reliable and scientifically sound advocacy.
And I would agree, and I would just caution that what most people may or may not be aware of is that for a test to get FDA approved in this country, you simply have to show that if you take the same sample, you will get results that were within an acceptable standard deviation every time you run that sample. That doesn't mean doctors actually know how to use that test. So I could give you lots of examples in oncology of tests that have gotten FDA approved, and they directly market to the consumer, which is the person diagnosed with the disease. And they make all sorts of promises that here's what this test can do, when the reality is the necessary clinical research to prove that that test could be the holy grail that they're currently promising patients it is, that has yet to actually been proven. So there has to be a true clinical actionability to these tests. So yes, I know my patients are at increasing risk of getting diagnosed with breast cancer, particularly women after they have had children, but mammograms aren't going to help us find that because these are women who are lactating. We need different types of biomarkers. We need creative ways of finding these things that have to be proven and get to the level of true evidence-based medicine to show that we're really going to benefit people. Otherwise, all you're doing is adding to the cost of their healthcare, and financial toxicity is real. And you are also causing tremendous anxiety because every single one of these tests can have false positives, or just the anxiety of going and getting the test. And it is a little bit nefarious what can happen out there with some of these products, but at the same time, if those companies partner with research and we get the right research done, these are the things that are absolutely revolutionary and practice changing.
By the way, a lot of guys in the audience, we want men and women to study women's health and sex differences. So it's really important. And so you're not here for nothing. Just remember, change your career. No.
The other thing I would just add really quickly to that, because I do think the policy piece is really important. Through some of the work that I'm doing now with the Women's Health Innovation Hub, we do have a section for policy as well. And Anna has been kind enough to connect me with the Women's Health Advocates group out of DC, and it's a nonprofit group as well. They are expanding their regional impact. And my hope is to partner with them as well here to have a regional presence to talk to our state and local officials around women's health and advocating for women's health, whether it's research or invention, innovation, or funding. So happy to talk more offline, but it really is an important piece to, again, bring attention to something that people aren't really talking about necessarily, but there is a huge increase in that conversation happening over the last couple of years. So on the policy side, I do think it's really important that we pay attention to that and get involved.
So I have a question. Thank you all. I admire, respect, and look up to all of you. And it's going to be a little dark, my question. I was just at a national meeting in a large convention center in a large city, going to the restroom, when a woman was standing in the restroom asking if anybody had a quarter because she needed a tampon. And after I got over my rage, which included like, let's break into the tampon machine and get this woman a tampon, I started thinking to myself, at some point in time, somebody invented the tampon machine and they thought it was a great idea and this will be great for women. And there's a huge market. Every bathroom in the country can have a tampon machine. And now we look at it and say, oh my God, women have to pay for tampons in the bathroom? So what I started thinking is, how do we make sure that in women's health research, we don't inadvertently exploit women's health?
I will just tell you.
On this campus, they're free. They were not always. And also, I don't know if you've noticed on this campus, there are lactation rooms. There were not always. My partner in crime had to use my office. You're going to say something?
I would just add, there's a company by the name of AntFlow. Have you ever heard of them? They are doing exactly that work. It's kind of like having it, they want it to be standard, right? Toilet paper is in every bathroom, right? And businesses and companies just pay for that. So AntFlow is a great innovative company that started a couple years ago. I did not invest in that company, but I love the work they're doing, and they are making their access to feminine protection everywhere. They've started in major companies. They're in Google, they're in Apple. They're a really cool company innovating in that space to make it accessible, right? So you don't even think about it. You don't need a quarter.
Yeah.
So
I think to speak to the bigger topic of how do you not become exploitative, where there is right now this enormous gap in women's healthcare delivery, right? If we think of a bigger picture. And a lot of that gap today is being filled by telehealth companies. And those telehealth companies oftentimes are doing good because they're actually providing care that women have trouble seeking. Like, for example, even with menopause hormone therapy, a lot of clinicians aren't educated on it, right? And so you have companies like MIDI, Everlywell, many others, WIS, who are filling that space because women don't have anywhere to go. And yet it is all out of pocket. Right? Yet, if you could get the standard of care that you needed, if you can get into your doctor's office and they would just listen to you, that should all be covered by insurance, but it is not. And therefore, a lot of this venture funded opportunity, of course, is driven by profit. And I think that's where legislators have to be aware. We have to work with groups. We have to work with reimbursement. I was at a phenomenal meeting a couple of weeks ago where they were saying how a lot of the coding for the reimbursement and the laws were written in something like the 60s, 70s, whatever it is. And they do not allow, at that time, they didn't recognize women's health. And so they do not allow for the type of advancements that needs to happen. And today legislatures don't even understand that, right? Don't even understand how a lot of the coding and the reimbursement happens. And so we have to elevate the conversation. We have to talk about it. We have to work with advocacy groups, which Liz Powell is a powerhouse for women's health advocates, where they just had the first ever Women's Health Day on the Hill, and like 50 women showed up and knocked on a bunch of legislators' doors and were like, do you realize this is happening in your state? Because to be fair to legislators, they have so many issues they have to address, and so it has to get on their radar. And so I think I completely hear what you're saying, is that the space is being filled by for-profit companies, but that for-profit companies is also can be exploiting women for their money, because in addition, they're adding all types of services that are like, take collagen, take this, take peptides. Peptides are like all the rage now. And it's like, what are they doing? And so, but then all of a sudden they become that trusted source. And I think we need to collectively be having those conversations and engage and ensure insurance is paying for it.
thank you. Do we have time for one more question? One more?
Yeah, thanks. It's really, Mike Holler, it's really a wonderful discussion. Thank you. So we just wanted to bring up an area which Judy and I have been communicating about, but it's an area that I think is not often realized as an area of women's health. I'm a rheumatologist. We know it takes at least 2 years for someone to actually be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. They're very hard to diagnose. You have symptoms which are often vague. Rich Zane pointed this out over the lunch hour. about 80% of patients with autoimmune disease are women. So you actually have a situation where you've got, a lot of undiagnosed autoimmune disease sitting in women. And I'm just wondering, is that an area that's gaining traction in the sort of women's health community? It certainly is a challenge in the NIH because the NIH is structured based on organs, and nobody took the spleen when they were being divided up because that's where all the immune cells are. And so somebody needs to, I think there's an area, a huge need and opportunity, I guess.
The Ludeman Center is interested. We'll take the spleen for you, Mike. We are, as you know, we had Kristen Demerol, who unfortunately just left, but she was our inroad into rheumatoid arthritis. But now Mike and I have been talking, and we're talking about, I'm writing it into the Building Interdisciplinary Research Careers in Women's Health grant right now as we speak. And Mike and Christy Kuhn and I will be having further conversations, and maybe those conversations will come to the innovation side because you're already there. So I think there's exciting opportunities, and it is so important.
I can tell you from a private sector, autoimmune is one of the biggest topics right now in terms of women's health, because up until GLP-1s, Humira was the biggest drug, right? The biggest, most expensive drug that made money, and it's an autoimmune disease, and nobody realized that's women's health, right? And so I can tell you there's a lot of conversations. There's tremendous interest from the investor community. A lot of it is on the treatment side, but some of it I think is also on the diagnostic side, and how do you shorten that diagnostic odyssey?
Well, thank you all for staying late this afternoon. And I want to thank this wonderful panel of experts for joining us this afternoon. And thank you all.